Midnight on the East Coast. This is CNN Tonight. I'm Don Lemon. In the breaking news tonight, an anti-Trump wave sweeping Democrats to power in Virginia. Ralph Northam claiming a huge win in the governor's race. At least 13 seats in the state house flipped from red to blue. Many other local races going to Democrats. The question tonight, will that wave hit President Trump and the GOP in 2018? But victory doesn't stop in Virginia. Democrats also winning the governor's race in New Jersey, currently in the hands of Republican Chris Christie. And New York City's Democratic mayor easily winning a second term tonight. Bill de Blasio, that is. My political dream team is here with me, and we're live tonight with the very latest in the election. But let's begin this hour, the coverage, with our senior political analyst, and that's Mr. Mark Preston. Mark, hello to you. You've been going through these exit polls from tonight's races. What do they tell us about what could be in store for 2018?
Well, Don, we got data out of the New Jersey race, governor's race, and as well as the race here in Virginia. But we're going to focus in on Virginia because the state is racially, economically, and geographically diverse. So it gives us an idea of how things could play out across the country. Let's look at what the approval rating is right now, Don, in Virginia. Now, this is from the exit poll. As you see that, his approval rating was at 40%. His disapproval rating was at 57%. Now, leave that graphic up. We have released a national telephone poll in the last 48 hours that basically tracks with these numbers, Don. So the exit poll numbers are seeming to track to what we're seeing across the country nationally. Now, if we can just flip it, why did people vote tonight? If you see this right here, to oppose Donald Trump. I mean, look at those numbers right there. 98% of those people supported Ralph Northam, and of course, only 2% supported Gillespie. However, what we're not showing right there, though, and let me just tell you right now, is that when you look at it right there, to support Donald Trump, 16% of people went out to vote to support Donald Trump. Look at that number, 34%, more than double the amount of people went out as an opposition vote against Donald Trump. So as we talk about this election, as we talk about 2018, Don, clearly Donald Trump had an effect on this race.
All right, so that's the president, Mark. What are people saying about the Republican and Democratic parties in Virginia?
Well, good news again, too, for the Democrats, bad news for Republicans. Let's look at these numbers right now. If you look at there, it shows that the Democrats right now had a 51% approval rating coming out of this exit poll. If you look at that, the unfavorable rating was 45%. Now, if you look at the Republican numbers, their approval rating was only at 45%, Don. So if you look at these numbers right now, it just goes to show you that Democrats were doing very, very well in Virginia. Now, I should say we released a national poll, Don, earlier today that showed that Democrats right now have a 37% approval rating. Okay, so that doesn't match up to the 51% approval rating Democrats have in the state of Virginia. But what it does give us an indication, though, is that when Democrats are out there campaigning, their message is selling. And as I said, if we just show the Republican numbers right here as well, the Republican numbers pretty much tracking with what we saw in our national poll. Right now, their favorable rating, Don, was only 37% in Virginia. Nationally, Don, and this is what a big concern is for congressional Republicans, in our national poll released this morning, just shows that their favorable rating is at 30% right now. So if you're a Republican, you are running for re-election in 2018, you are very much concerned.
Interesting. I'm going to put up, this is a tweet, Mark, from the former Vice President Joe Biden. He said, a resounding defeat tonight for President Trump. Voters around the country rejected the ugly politics we have seen this past year and said they chose candidates who unite and inspire us. Do you think tonight sends a signal to potential Democratic challenges to President Trump, Vice President Biden included, maybe?
Yeah, I do, Don, and I think for the very simple terms of, if we just look at Virginia again, if you look at Ralph Northam, he's somebody who's able to bring out the liberal side of the base and the more moderate side of the base that came together to support his candidacy. If you're going to run against Donald Trump in 2020, then here's two things to keep in mind. And a lot of Democratic consultants are saying that they've told their candidates this running in 2018. Don't talk about Donald Trump. Talk about the economy. Talk about jobs. Talk about how the Democratic Party is better for America than what we see from Donald Trump. Let Donald Trump make his own mistakes. Let him tweet. Let him trip himself up. Because that's why, Don, if you look at his approval rating that we just talked about, that's why Donald Trump is doing so poorly right now. It's really self-inflicted wounds.
Mark, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Mr. Mark Preston. The big wins for Democrats tonight, exactly 1 year after Donald Trump's stunning victory over Hillary Clinton in the presidential election. Joining me now, CNN political analyst Joshua Green, national correspondent for Bloomberg Businessweek, senior political reporter Nia Malika Henderson, political analyst Kirsten Powers, senior political commentator David Axelrod, a former senior advisor to President Obama, and political commentators Paul Begala, Simone Sanders, Jason Miller, the former senior communications advisor for the Trump campaign, and political commentator Amanda Carpenter. Before I play this, someone to play what's happening 1 year. Is Biden running?
I think that he is actively considering it. Yeah, he seems to be talking. I mean, he seems to be talking to people about it. I think that he's very, very active. He's going on a 40-city book tour, which is often a prelude to something. And I expect that he's very much down the road.
A couple of weeks ago, he was in Reston, Virginia, campaigning for Ralph Northam. So he's a winner. He can claim, President Kennedy used to say victory has 1,000 fathers and defeat is an orphan. And by the way, Terry McAuliffe, the Democratic governor of Virginia, a huge winner here. A lot of people are going to look to him to run.
Yeah.
The question is on this issue of what lessons candidates should take from this. The fact is that in both parties, candidates have to go through a nominating process, and sometimes the nominating process has different demands than the process of winning a general election. And I think one of the challenges for the Democratic Party is do candidates position themselves in such a way as to win the nominating process and make themselves less electable in a general election? And that remains to be seen.
So can you guys believe it's been a year? It was 1 year ago tonight.
Feels like 10.
Admit. What'd you say?
Feels like 10.
Hopefully there'll be 7 more.
Is that in dog years?
So, well, it would be one more election. It would, yeah. One more election now.
Many more years.
Yes, each year for me with President Trump is like a dog year.
Yes.
In fact, a female dog year, I would say. It's very difficult for me.
Hard to say there.
Here's what was going on just a year ago on CNN. Watch this.
Donald Trump is ahead. He has 232 electoral votes compared to Hillary Clinton's 209 electoral votes. You need 270 to become the president of the United States. He is ahead of Hillary Clinton right now, but there are still several of those yellow states that are outstanding right now. So we'll see what happens in those states. He's clearly doing now, Dana, what he did during the Republican primary, surprising a lot of folks.
That's absolutely right.
Right now, a historic moment. We can now project the winner of the presidential race. CNN projects Donald Trump wins the presidency. The business tycoon and TV personality capping his improbable political journey with an astounding upset victory. Donald J. Trump will become the 45th president of the United States, defeating Hillary Clinton in a campaign unlike anything we've seen in our lifetime.
It is interesting. I remember being on the streets of New York and people were looking at, and I'm like,
Shocked, right?
How many times do you think he's watched that tape?
a lot.
Probably not as many as I have.
Every night before he goes to bed, I'm sure.
It's been a year. I mean, a lot has changed in the political landscape in a year.
Yeah. Donald Trump hasn't really changed, though, right? I mean, he is essentially the same person he ran as, the kind of tweets that stir things up, the bullying in terms of people in his own party, talking about the press in the way that he does. I was in this chair a year ago, and I think I am surprised at how little Donald Trump has actually been able to do. I remember texting back and forth with somebody in the Obama administration, essentially saying, the whole Obama legacy is over, right? And they're going to be able to run the table on any number of things in terms of overturning legislation or passing new legislation. And that just hasn't happened. And I think we saw the results of that tonight with folks in Virginia and in different states essentially saying, well, we signed up for something in terms of voting for Trump, but he hasn't necessarily delivered. And not only that, he's tweeting wild and crazy things at other Republicans, and it's not amounting to anything.
Josh, that was a concern from Democrats, is that it was a Republican House, Republican Senate, Republican White House, and that there would be legislative accomplishments that Democrats did not like. That has not happened.
Not at all. And the real fear was the morning after, because Trump's victory speech, we've all forgotten this, but Trump went out on stage and said, I want to be president for all Americans. And that sent a message, very short-lived, but it sent a message that he really might reach across the aisle and maybe lead with something like infrastructure. And so you had a lot of Democrats, Chuck Schumer worried that Trump would steal a big part of the Democratic base, the blue-collar white workers who are tempted by him anyway. And had he governed differently, he might have, but that's not the Trump that we see now a year later.
Yeah. I want to ask you, is this, we talk about the president constantly reaching out to his base. That's a strategy, reach out to his base, reach out to his base. He only does interviews on one network, which a number of people have labeled the Trump network now. That's clearly not paying off for him. If you look at the poll numbers, he's not gaining, and he hasn't reached across the aisle. He hasn't brought in any new voters. He hasn't brought in any independent voters. And you see it in the poll numbers, and maybe you see it playing out in races. Does the strategy need to change, Jason?
Well, I think part of what the president needs to do is go back to some of the strategy that works so well on the campaign trail. And what I mean by that is getting back on offense. I mean, I was with the president when he went into Cleveland and talked about school choice, went into African-American neighborhoods and talked about infrastructure and how we're going to bring back jobs and opportunity. And
you said he needs to come off of offense or go back on offense?
He needs to go back on offense.
When is he's been on offense the entire time.
No, but hold on. But this is on the campaign trail. But hold on, on the campaign trail, I felt like the president really took on big issues and thought really big, transformative agenda items. And I feel that we're getting too much of the president's success or failure right now is being dictated by what 100 knuckleheads up on Capitol Hill give a thumbs up or thumbs down to. And so when we talk about these things can truly change people's lives for the better, like infrastructure, jobs, school choice, things like that, things where people look and say, wow, I did not expect you, Donald Trump, to go and actually make good on this promise or do these big things. And the other thing, too, is keep in mind, during the campaign, one of the things that made Donald Trump stand out so much, he would go to news outlets and media outlets that typical Republicans would never go to, and he would do great. And he would take this message because people didn't view him as some traditional politician.
That was my question. Now he's calling them fake. When he needed them, he's like, oh, yeah, of course I'll do the interview.
He can still go back. People are still going to put him on because he's ratings gold. So he should go and take advantage of that, get back on offense.
But won't that be hypocritical if he goes back and he's I'm doing an interview with a fake news organization?
No, go back and because he's going to have his message, and go back and do it. There's a little bit of the showman aspect in it, so go back and do it. But the one cool thing about election night, I had the one cool small thing. I get to brag just for a moment.
I mean, brag. It makes me sick, but go right ahead.
I was the one who had the opportunity to tell him that they just called the race and he became president. And so a minor footnote in history, but it was pretty cool backstage to say, Mr. President or Mr. President-elect, and he's like, they called it and said, you're the next president of the United States. So it's pretty exciting.
Don,
wait, hold on. What was his reaction?
I think it was kind of a momentary, he just kind of looked, and then just the biggest smile came over his face. We did it, and then everyone started hugging each other. It was a pretty cool moment.
Yeah.
Something that Jason said, I want to go back to. These 100 knuckleheads up on the Hill, that is our government. Congress is a co-equal branch of government to the executive branch, and the fact that Donald Trump has not been able to grasp that concept in this short year, I think is really important. It's going to dictate what the next year looks like, not just for him, but Republicans down the ballot. And so going back to whatever he did on the campaign trail was only speaking to a very specific group of people. If you really want to be president of everybody, you have to act like you would like to be president of everybody.
All right. Well, I got to go. When we come right back, President Trump urging the CIA director to meet with a conspiracy theorist who doubts Russia hacked the DNC. I'm going to talk about this development with the former director of national intelligence, James Clapper. The president addressing South Korea's National Assembly tonight and bluntly warning North Korea's regime not to mess with the United States.
The weapons you are acquiring are not making you safer. They are putting your regime in grave danger. Every step you take down this dark path increases the peril you face. North Korea is not the paradise your grandfather envisioned. It is a hell that no person deserves. Yet, despite every crime you have committed against God and man, you are ready to offer, and we will do that. We will offer a path to a much better future.
Joining me now, CNN national security analyst James Clapper, the former director of national intelligence. So good to have you on. Thank you so much. After watching the president's speech tonight, in your opinion, what are the odds for, do they decrease or increase for a conflict with North Korea?
Well, I don't think they change him a whole lot. I don't think, I think that it was a strong speech, but it was absent the careless, inflammatory rhetoric we've seen before. And I think it did several things. It was reassuring to the Republic of Korea. It's not going to intimidate the North. I thought the litany about human rights abuses was kind of striking, that he would do that. The idea of suggesting, I think he was messaging the Chinese here and the Russians about severing relationships, I'm not sure what that means. I think the Chinese are going to be hard-pressed to do that, and one of the greater strategic imperative for the Chinese is that North Korea not implode, and violently particularly, and that they lose their buffer state. That is, I think, the overriding strategic imperative for the Chinese. But the speech was mostly stick and not much carrot. And I wish he'd expanded a bit on his press conference remarks about a deal. And offered something, a path to negotiation. If I'd have been drafting a speech, which is unlikely that'll ever happen, I think I would have tried to insert some language in there about the fact the United States has no permanent enemies. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the cases of Germany and Japan, and the DPRK, or North Korea, doesn't have to be a permanent enemy either.
Well, he didn't. What he did not do in this speech was put North Korea back on the terror sponsor list. Was that a smart move?
I agree. Yes, I think it was. I really don't think there's much to be gained by that in terms of what that actually means for North Korea, and I think that's something he ought to hold back. They know that's out there, and they don't want to be put on that list, so I think it was a good thing not to do it.
Well, let's talk about negotiations, because he said, North Korea should not underestimate his administration. This is a new and different administration. I'm wondering where diplomacy stands right now, because it wasn't long ago where he was urging Tillerson. He said Tillerson was wasting his time negotiating.
Yes, and I don't think I personally don't think the Secretary of State is ever wasting his time through diplomacy. That's his job. And as Secretary Mattis has said, we're always looking to negotiate. And again, the inference of his press conference remarks was there was something afoot here, hopefully diplomatic. I don't know what that means. And I wish I was looking for that in his speech. I was hoping there'd be more on a path ahead for negotiations. I don't find, or didn't when I was there, the North Korean great interest in a peace treaty, because all we have is an armistice there for 64 years, a ceasefire. And so that to me is a reasonable request, and of course that wasn't in the speech.
Yeah. All this is happening, and Russia's in the background. Russia's still playing out here, even as he's overseas, as he is overseas. And then we have this, where at the urging of the president, we have Mike Pompeo, who's a CIA director. The president met last month, Mike Pompeo, with a U.S. intel official who denies that Russia meddled in the election and has this conspiracy theory that it was an inside job. How unusual is that meeting?
Well, it's unusual, and in fairness to Director Pompeo, I think if the president asks you to meet with somebody as much as you may not want to, and my sensing is, just from the length of time it took to meet, that he probably didn't want to do that, because he understood the impact that was going to have on the intelligence community at large. And I was gratified when he did reaffirm the findings of the intelligence community assessment, and the evidence that it wasn't an inside job is pretty substantial.
But what does it say, though? It seems like the president is still questioning the intelligence community that Russia meddled in the election. What does that say to you as a member of the?
It shows the lengths to which the president will go to grasp straws to try to rebut that assessment, and it was very solid. Mm-hmm. And so I think he just won't let it go, and he's looking for any way he can to attack the notion that the Russians interfered, and they did, and quite substantially.
New details are coming out about Carter Page, that Capitol Hill testimony. On a trip to Russia, he interacted with the Russian deputy prime minister. He also says that top campaign officials, including Corey Lewandowski, Hope Hicks, and Jeff Sessions, knew about that trip. What does it all mean for those folks, especially because they're still in the administration? Some of them, Corey Lewandowski isn't.
Well, this is a continuation of this drip, drip, drip of implicating people associated with the campaign and in some cases with the administration about this interaction with the Russians. That's why it is so important that this come to closure at some point. And of course, the great hope here for me is Special Counsel Mueller, which I think whatever he comes out with should be considered the definitive word. But this business of incrementally these revelations coming out is not good for anybody. Not good for the country and not good for the president.
Yeah. Director Clapper, always a pleasure.
Thanks, Don.
Thank you, sir. When we come back, President Trump calls the Russia investigation a hoax. It's not. We have the latest developments right after the break. Back now with my political dream team. So let's get some analysis now. When you look back at the results tonight, David Axelrod, the Russia investigation, the indictments, and on and on and on, was that on voters' minds as they went to the ballot box?
You know, I don't think that that a specific issue, the Russia investigation, for example, was what motivated them. I think there was a general sense of anti-Trump energy out there. If there was an issue, you know, if you look at the exit poll, the one issue overwhelmingly that people said they were motivated by was health care. And I think that was a verdict on the president. 78% of those people said they voted for Northam. What's interesting is that was far more than the number of people who said that immigration, for example, was their main concern. In fact, if you added immigration and guns together, it would be less than the number of people who said health care was an issue. I mean, I think there's something going on in this country, and you saw it welling up, not just in Virginia, but in other places around the country tonight. And, you know, we've seen this at times when there's an unpopular president, unpopular policies, the opposition party gets a burst of energy. And we saw that burst of energy in Virginia tonight and elsewhere at a magnitude that I don't think anybody expected. Again, you know, I'd say the governor's race was surprising because of its margin. The legislative races were mind-boggling. The fact that Democrats who were 2-1 in the minority today could tomorrow or the next day actually be in control of the Virginia House of Delegates, that's a big warning sign for Republicans.
Kirsten, I want to ask you what's going on, because the exit polls in Virginia in the governor's race showed that 1 in 6 voters made up their minds during the last week. Northam won those late deciders 62 to 36%. Do you think voters are fed up with scandal? Are they just fed up with nothing happening? Is it a resistance?
Well, I mean, the race definitely got more ugly in the closing days, and so that definitely could have turned them off. But I think that it's, you know, I was saying earlier that I wouldn't read too much into the governor's race, but I think it's right to look at the legislature, the House of Delegates, because those races are more of an approximation of like a generic ballot race, because they don't have the kind of television ads and the people are less well known. And in recent polls, Democrats are polling better on the generic ballot. And so I think what that's saying is that people, I think it is an anti-Trump, it's a reaction to Trump in large part, versus in the governor's race, like I said, it's a Democratic state. There's a Democratic governor right now. These are people that are taking Republican seats.
It's also a measure of organization. And organization is driven by enthusiasm. Lots and lots and lots of people showed up in the state of Virginia and went door to door for these legislative candidates, and that actually makes a difference.
Yeah. Go on.
You cannot win if you do not play. Steve Forbert, great Mississippi songwriter, right? The Democrats put good candidates up in races that most people didn't think they could win in Virginia today, in those House of Delegates races that Kirsten's talking about. This is an important lesson. So you have to be, Democrats should have learned a lot, I think, from 2016, which is you got to reach out to people. You can't just say, well, we're going to tend to our base, but you cannot ignore your base. You have to have that enthusiasm. You can't win. The plane needs both wings to fly. And right now, the Democrats look like they got both wings together and everybody's moving flying in the same direction. That's a really impressive thing for my party, which is almost never united.
Which I find it's interesting that most people at the table agree that the Russia investigation didn't play much into what voters decided?
It's a piece of it. I mean, I think it's a part of the overall anti-Trump sentiment, but in terms of issues that were on their minds, like they said, healthcare was the overwhelming issue, but I think there's a general
But I don't think it's specifically necessarily anti-Trump, because what we've seen is when Democrats do run on just anti-Trump and they're just talking about Donald Trump, they're not necessarily successful. So it was also that Democrats and racists across the country had a message to speak to voters. But, you know, Congressman Cedric Richmond, chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus, just texted and he was like, look, we can't spike the ball on the first yard line. He said tonight we may have won in spite of ourselves.
Yeah.
And he noted that we need a long-term plan to engage voters of color, young people. So there's more work that Democrats have to do.
I will say one thing about this race. I think there's a lot of Democrats that just went to the polls, pulled the lever for the Democratic ticket as a protest vote, and didn't know anything about this candidate. I'm not taking anything away from him, but I've heard people say it. And I think it's probably true. He also flew very much below the radar. What would have happened if he got in a Twitter fight with Donald Trump? I mean, I think it's a smart strategy for Democrats to just stay below the radar, run their race, but that is not really a doable thing in 2020. And so, you know, you can't just, there is an anti-Trump vote, but that's not everything.
But you don't fight fire with fire. You fight fire with water. And so Mr. Trump is bellicose, okay? Governor-elect Northam is very soft-spoken. Mr. Trump is extreme.
But at one point you will have to engage.
Moderate. Donald Trump is divisive. Ralph Northam is a uniter. This is a thing Democrats can learn. It's not everywhere that we need moderates or everywhere that we need progressives. It's that everywhere we need to be anti-Trump in the best sense of the word. Not just like against everything he proposes, but it's against this most unlovely and undignified campaign, the way that Ed Gillespie ran it. And I know Ed, and he should be ashamed of himself. He ran a racist, divisive set of ads, and he should be ashamed of himself.
Well, like the Latino Victory Fund ad?
The Latino Victory Fund ad was, are you calling that ad racist? Because what it did was call out racism. Ed Gillespie...
I'll say that was a disgusting...
What was disgusting is Ed Gillespie stoking the worst parts of American people. That's what's disgusting. There's nothing disgusting about calling out racism.
A Democratic ad where
wasn't a Democratic ad.
Getting a
where they
pretend they're going to go and drive some kids down.
The ad was young. The ad was kids of color running, and what they were running from was a truck with a bumper sticker with the Confederate flag on it and Ed Gillespie. Nope, they were saying Ed Gillespie was running a really racist campaign, and if you don't like that type of stuff, don't vote for Ed Gillespie in Virginia.
We'll find the ad and then we'll talk about it.
But it was not a Democratic ad. It ran one time and it was disavowed.
We'll be right back.
Gillespie put his name on the racist ad.
We'll be right back. All right, back now with my team. We were talking about political ads run in this particular election, one of which was a Latino ad, and explain to our viewers what this one is from.
This is a group called the Latino Victory Fund, and it ran an ad. I think it ran once, and the Democratic candidate, disavowed it right away. And I think it was an outrageous ad. It was totally unfair, and it came off right away. That somehow that is the equivalent of Ed Gillespie putting his name and his image on race-baiting ads, which he did day after day after day, is not the same. That's a completely unfair
Let's watch this ad, and then we'll talk about it. Here it is.
Is this what Donald Trump and Ed Gillespie mean by the American dream?
So let me say, I think that ad is, one, Latino Victory Fund, I think Cristobal, who is the president of the Latino Victory Fund, put out a statement saying they knew that ad would ruffle feathers. There are lots of people in America, specifically in Virginia, that felt directly attacked by Ed Gillespie candidacy, the type of race he was running. And while Paul may not agree with the ad, and many other people, I think it was also right politically for Ralph Northam to disavow the ad. But the fact of the matter is, Ed Gillespie ran a really racist campaign. That many people have said that's not who he is. That's who he was in this election. And if folks are upset about people calling out racism, I think you should be more upset about the racism and the racist tactics than folks calling out racism.
This is an Ed Gillespie ad that people thought was racist. Here it is, MS-13 ad. Fear-based.
It's right. Look at the imagery. This is exactly like a 21st century Willie Horton ad. Those people in that ad, by the way, that photograph was taken in El Salvador. They're not in Virginia. Virginia has the third lowest crime rate in America. Okay, and for Ed Gillespie to come right at Donald Trump's playbook and say, "Ooh, scary Latinos are coming to your Commonwealth."
But
it's
MSNBC,
by the way, there are no sanctuary cities
Why
in Virginia.
is it wrong for Ed Gillespie to bring up the fact that Northam at one time did support sanctuary cities? Everybody says, well, there's no sanctuary cities in Virginia. Yeah, it's because the governor's already been opposed to it. That helps. If the mayor starts pursuing sanctuary city policies,
they don't have the authority under state law.
You have a president that threatens to withhold federal funding.
Seriously.
Why are you not allowed? Why is it racist to talk about
Let me ask you a question. Leaving the side of whether it's racist or not racist, do you think that anyone who watched that ad who had no other information would know that there are no sanctuary cities in Virginia? I mean, the clear implication was that there are, and that's why there is this problem. Now, look, I'm not an engineer. I made 1,000 political ads, okay? So I understand exactly what the intent of it was, and it did help gin up Gillespie's.
Well, it backfired.
Well, let me tell you something.
Not only did Ralph Northam win by 9 points, Democrats also elected the first Latina House delegate in Virginia tonight, in spite of ads like these. So voters obviously were seeing these ads, and an awful lot of them.
Well, that was the calculation that Gillespie had to make. He wasn't winning, and he made this calculation that he was going to get off of the economic message on TV and go to this message to try and arouse his base. But it's very hard to gin up your base and not gin up everybody else at the same time in opposition to it. And I think part of the reason that you had this enormous turnout was because of the backlash.
And he played the culture wars, I mean, not only in that way, but with the NFL, and he sent out mailers showing NFL players kneeling, and the Robert E. Lee, embracing Robert E. Lee, saying, I mean, I don't even think he's from Virginia. I think he's from, but anyway. So, yeah, I mean, coming into this, the thought was maybe this would work. Maybe this would be a playbook that you could replicate if you were a Republican in any other state, but it backfired. I think everyone is surprised at how much it backfired.
But Bannon had called it Trumpism without Trump. You know, the thinking going into tonight was that if Republicans win big, every Republican in the country is going to mimic this strategy.
Right. But the two problems
is that that's not a very good idea.
But Kirsten, a Republican strategist across the country looking at this going, oh, maybe we should back off, maybe we shouldn't be so close, maybe it shouldn't be Trump or Trumpism.
Yeah, probably, but I think that's exactly right. This was intentional. They were trying something out, and they thought it was going to work. I mean, they really believed that this was going to work, and that, you know, if it would work in a state like Virginia, then it would work in other states. And they made the immigration issue central. You know, the cultural issues with the NFL and those types of things. These are things that Trump uses to divide people in the country. We've seen him, it's how he opened his campaign, you know, with the immigration issue.
What does this mean for the president's agenda moving forward? Because now taxes, and every Republican will say they think they have to get something done. He's got to have one legislative accomplishment.
Well,
that's just a small. Taxes.
We'll
just a very
answer it
small
right
part
after
of
the
it.
break.
Now taxes is small.
It is election night, and I'm back with my political dream team. So, Mr. Axelrod, I think that blue state Republicans, you can say blue state Republicans from the local level in suburbs, right, got creamed.
Yes.
So the big story tomorrow is going to be the impact of this blue wave on those Republicans in blue states.
I think that is the story. I think that Republicans, particularly in suburban areas, like the areas in which we saw Ralph Northam and a lot of these legislative candidates roll up big numbers tonight, have to be worried. And it's not just here. In New York, for example, the Westchester County executive, who was a Republican, won last time by 10 points, lost by 16 tonight. Senator Chris Murphy tweeted that all over Connecticut, town leadership changed from Republican to Democrat. That's a very suburban state. There is a problem with Republican and independent voters, Republican-leaning and independent voters in some of these areas. And the turnout issue is huge. Our colleague Ron Brownstein tweeted that Wortham.
It's late.
Sorry. Yes, it is late. It is late.
That's okay.
I'll just call him Governor-elect. Governor-elect got 330,000 more votes than either Terry McAuliffe or Mark Warner in 2013 and 2014. 330,000 votes. Ed Gillespie got 100,000 more votes than he got when he ran in 2014, but that was dwarfed by the turnout, and this was in those suburban areas. So yes, I think, this is the battleground in these congressional races in 2018. So I think Republicans have a lot to think about. I do think they'll go in, the leaders will go into their caucuses tomorrow and say, we got to pass tax reform because if we don't pass, this is what we're going to get if we don't do something.
Well, that's. I'm glad you asked it, because I was going to ask Nia. You heard what he said about health care. More people cared about health care than thought of. Now these same people, these blue state Republicans, are going to be asked to vote for, this tax plan that could hurt their constituents.
Yeah, and that's why you see some of them already saying they can't back it. If you're from New York, for instance, and these, if they do away with the state and local deduction, that's not a good thing. There are all sorts of things, getting rid of deductions for student loans, adoptions, all sorts of things buried in medical expenses, all sorts of things buried in to this very Republican approach to taxes. It doesn't seem necessarily to be a populist approach to taxes. I mean, they sort of lead with this idea of cutting corporate tax rate to 20% and this idea that all of that is going to somehow trickle down to the little guy, right? These white working class voters who are part of Trump's base. I'm not sure that that's necessarily sexy enough for those voters to really be attached to and really, really be excited about.
As Jason said, it doesn't pull on the heartstrings of the Trump voter. But are we looking at another health care fight?
Well, we could be, because one of the things that Republicans are thinking about doing to help pay for this corporate tax cut is to abolish the individual mandate in the Affordable Care Act, which would have the effect of pulling health care and energizing a lot of these angry Democratic voters who turned out tonight because of health care into this tax fight, which I think might not be something that Republicans want to fight about right now.
So what happens if taxes don't get passed? Tax reform.
It's a problem. Here's the thing. A lot of Republicans went along with Trump because he's a deal maker who's going to get things done. Without those deals, you can only run on Trumpism. That's what Ed Gillespie tried to do in Virginia. It did not work. And so there's a lot of Republicans who I think are retiring now, making the calculation, I do not wish to run on Trumpism. Jeff Flake, Bob Corker, other House seats, and they're taking themselves off the field. That's what I fear happening going into 2018.
Did they take themselves off too early, considering what happened tonight?
What do you mean? I mean, if they don't want to campaign on Trumpism and defy the RNC, defy the White House, I mean, look what President Trump did to Ed Gillespie tonight. Ed Gillespie lost, and President Trump knifed him as he went down and said, "You didn't campaign on my agenda." I mean, it was like, do that.
I mean, I'm fine with Flake and Corker hitting the road. I have no problem there. But like I said, we need to get tax cuts done. But then there's a lot more Republicans that they need to do when you talk about trade.
Listen, are you hearing what we're saying? You need to get, these Republicans in blue states got creamed, and they're going to add. This is going to potentially hurt their constituency. Do you think they're going to be able to?
But they're going to look. They'll tweak it so maybe it's a smaller tax cut for families in blue states. But at a certain point, I mean, first of all, the state and local tax deduction is complete garbage. It basically allows these blue states to go and have out of control governments, and then they go and get to deduct big chunks from it. But they'll go and they'll play around with it and do enough so they can go and get these blue state Republicans on board. So everyone's going to get a tax cut. I'm not too concerned about
when are they going to do this? It's Christmas. It's almost Thanksgiving.
It's an arbitrary deadline. Look, if they pass tax cuts in January, heck, if it's even the first or second week in February, it's still a win. They'll have it retroactive to January.
But what happens when it's the Trump supporter says, "Hey, man, this is not what you promised us"?
That's the problem. That this is not a Trump supporters tax cut. It's a swamp tax cut. This is designed by corporate special interests, by Paul Ryan and the wing of the party that Donald Trump ran against. This is a huge problem for those. They're going to have to stand up and defend this if they pass it or if they don't. Healthcare was the biggest issue in Virginia. They didn't even pass it. But Virginians didn't want Medicaid destroyed. That's the biggest political message you get out of this. The next election in 2018 is going to be all about these tax cuts. Do people really want to take away tax cuts from families who adopt babies in order to give a bigger tax cut to ExxonMobil?
Everyone's going to get
this gives the resistance something to run on.
Absolutely.
No, it gives lots of people lots of things to run on. Again, the Republicans have the White House, both chambers of Congress, and they have not been able to get anything done. Folks want results, and I've been across the country talking to folks. I've been running lots of focus groups with Trump voters who have said, look, we want to give him a year to see what he can do.
Yeah,
coming up on a year.
4.1% unemployment rate, record high stock market.
Okay.
And the economy is doing great. That's the thing.
Y'all take that to the bank in 2018.
What happens if the economy
That is, the economy is doing great.
You let me know if y'all,
are we living in the same place?
I want to give you the last word. Get something accomplished at all costs.
This economy is doing great.
Even if it hurts.
What do you mean?
He has to get something accomplished at all costs.
I mean, he should just get something accomplished just because that's what his job is, right? I mean, I don't, seriously, it's not just to get elected. I think that he should, I mean, these are serious problems, and there's a reason that a lot of people turned out because of health care, because health care is a major issue in this country that's bankrupting people, and people are dying because they don't have health care. So yeah, he needs to get something done, whether it's passing health care or tax cuts, but not to get reelected just because he's president.
Thank you all. This was fascinating. I appreciate it. That's it for us tonight. Thanks for watching. I'll see you right back here tomorrow. Actually, I'll be in New York tomorrow. Our live coverage continues right after this with John Voss in Los Angeles.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Hello and welcome to our viewers in the United States and around the world. I'm John Voss, live in Los Angeles, where it has just turned 10 o'clock here on the West Coast. And at this hour, Air Force One is expected to touch down in Beijing, the third and possibly most important stop on the U.S. president's 12-day visit to Asia. But before arriving in China, Mr. Trump called on Beijing to do a lot more to end the nuclear threat from North Korea. During an address to South Korea's National Assembly, the president offered the North Koreans a better future through diplomacy. But he also directly warned Kim Jong-un not to mistake American restraint for weakness.
Today, I hope I speak not only for our countries, but for all civilized nations. When I say to the North, do not underestimate us and do not try us.
North Korean officials were apparently closely watching what the president had to say, even though before the speech they told CNN's Will Ripley, who was in Pyongyang, we don't care about what the mad dog may utter because we've already heard enough. Well, for more on this, we're joined by Paula Hancock in Seoul. Matt Rivers is standing by in Beijing. Here in Los Angeles, CNN political commentators, Democratic strategist Dave Jacobson, and talk radio host and Trump supporter John Phillips. But Paula, we will start with you. Just a day earlier, the president seemed to indicate this willingness for negotiations to make a deal. But then he delivers this very blunt warning to North Korea and specifically to Kim Jong-un.
Yeah, this was an interesting speech, John. It was almost like he was trying a different tack. There were none of the blatant threats or the attacks on the North Korean leader himself by calling him Little Rocket Man, anything like that. But really the attack and the insults that we saw within this speech could well actually offend North Korea more than the threats of war. When you look at what he's talking about, he was talking about the stark contrast between North and South Korea, the fact that in North Korea the human rights abuses have been devastating over the year, the fact that the North Korean leader is more concerned with his nuclear and missile program than he is with feeding his own people, talking of the famine, talking of the gulags. Now, all of this, of course, based in fact, but the way he laid it out was really very cutting, very blunt, and it's something that quite likely the North Korean regime is not going to take to at all. He also said that, talking about Kim Il-sung, the grandfather who founded North Korea, who many in North Korea still have quite an affinity with, saying North Korea is not the paradise your grandfather envisioned. It is a hell that no person deserves. So it really went a lot further than many people really expected him to. Not the threats to destroy North Korea if need be, but really showing that he can take almost the moral high ground, showing that this is what North Korea is. How can other countries support this? John.
Okay, and with that in mind, Paula, we'll head over to Matt, who is in Beijing. And Matt, Donald Trump also called out Russia and China during that speech. Listen to this.
All responsible nations must join forces to isolate the brutal regime of North Korea, to deny it, and any form of it, you cannot support, you cannot supply, you cannot accept. We call on every nation, including China and Russia, to fully implement UN Security Council resolutions, downgrade diplomatic relations with the regime, and sever all ties of trade and technology.
Well, Matt, Donald Trump will be meeting with the Chinese leader Xi Jinping in the coming hours. What is Xi expected to say to Donald Trump? What will his reaction be to what he said just hours ago in Seoul?
Well, John, you and I have spent the last year, 2 years now talking about how China's strategic calculation when it comes to North Korea has not really changed. Yes, they've signed on to harsher, more tough sanctions drafted in the UN Security Council, but their strategic calculation that North Korea continues to be a buffer against the U.S. and the South Koreans in the southern part of the peninsula hasn't really changed. And whether that's going to change when Donald Trump comes here and meets Xi Jinping, I think most people, most analysts would scoff at that idea that over one day the Chinese would really completely change their viewpoint on this issue. But one thing that Donald Trump pointed to during that speech that Paula alluded to when she was talking, he really took the approach of almost an argument of morality, if you will, talking about how can countries like China look at themselves in the mirror, if you will, and continue to support a regime that brutally starves its own people, that puts them in forced labor camps, that tortures political prisoners. How could you continue to support that regime, not only from a political security standpoint, but from a moral argument standpoint? Now, whether that lands here in China, whether that changes things at all, that's to be seen. It probably won't. But that gives maybe a glimpse into Donald Trump's thinking. What is he going to argue? How is he going to try and change Xi Jinping's mind on all of this and get China to use its economic leverage against Pyongyang? Perhaps that morality argument might have something to do, might play into the Trump administration's position here.
Yeah, good luck. Okay, Matt, thank you. Matt Rivers there in Beijing. Paula Hancock's also with us live in Seoul. Let's go to our panel now. Political commentators Dave Jacobson and John Phillips. Okay, Dave, the speech wasn't the total disaster that so many people had feared. There were some concerns that, Donald Trump would go off script, that he would again taunt, Kim Jong-un, call him Rocket Man. That didn't happen. In fact, he was even talking about diplomacy at one point, but that came with one key demand before any negotiations can begin with North Korea. Listen to what he said.
Despite every crime you have committed against God and man, you are ready to offer, and we will do that. We will offer a path to a much better future. It begins with an end to the aggression of your regime, a stop to your development of ballistic missiles, and complete, verifiable, and total denuclearization.
Okay, so on the one hand, obviously there's now this off-ramp, if you like. You've been applying pressure for so long. Now there's this offer of talks. But the precondition of ending the nuclear program is a non-starter, right? So where does this all go from here?
I mean, I think he came off sort of all over the map. I mean, this is the guy who a couple weeks ago, maybe a month ago, undercut his Secretary of State, who said, hey, Rex, the talking isn't working. Give it up. So, and then he shifted today to more of a diplomatic strategy. And I think the tough talk with China in particular, I hope I'm wrong, but I think he's setting himself up for failure. China just intensified sanctions against North Korea. Obviously, I support, and I think Democrats and Republicans agree, we want tougher sanctions against North Korea. I just don't think there's necessarily going to be any movement on that front. And if Donald Trump fails to deliver on this trip tomorrow, I think it's going to raise real questions of whether or not he's a weaker president and he actually can get China to do anything further on this issue.
Yeah, I guess, John, it seems, with this speech, Donald Trump now finds himself pretty much in the same position as, the past several presidents have been in. Eventually he'll wrap his head around the fact that China is not going to solve this.
Well, he's a businessman and he wants to cut a deal, and I think we make a big mistake when we talk about how crazy Kim Jong-un is. He looks weird and acts weird and
does
says weird things. But in terms of being a thuggish, brutal dictator, he's quite rational. So he's going over there with the carrots and the sticks. He's trying to give the guy an off-ramp to avoid nuclear war and avoid a greater escalation to the trouble they're causing in the region. And he's sticking to the themes that he's talked about throughout the campaign and throughout his presidency. China is the big dog in the region. Nothing over there is going to happen without China getting on board. And, you know, they love to go to the UN and they love to pass these huge, grandiose resolutions about human rights. Well, you can't be in favor of human rights and support that regime. They're mutually exclusive, and I'm happy he called them out for that.
Look, absolutely. And it's been a long time since the U.S. president has done something like that. The problem, though, is, John, is that Donald Trump is assuming that China's interests are the same as American interests, and they're not. And so until he sort of gets to the point of realizing that they are playing a different game here, then this strategy seems to be a losing one right now.
Well, China has an economy that's expanding. China likes to do business with us. China likes to do business with the rest of the world. And if you want to continue to grow that economy and move into the 21st century as they do, you need stability in that region. You can't have a despot launching missiles over Japan into the ocean right and left. That creates instability that could really damage their economy.
Okay, another major part of the speech came with a warning to the North Koreans. Listen to this.
We will not permit America or our allies to be blackmailed or attacked. We will not allow American cities to be threatened with destruction. We will not be intimidated, and we will not let the worst atrocities in history be repeated here on this ground we fought and died so hard to secure.
Dave, that seems to be yet a whole lot of red lines being drawn by this administration, which he has drawn before, which the North Koreans have crossed.
I mean, this sort of reminded me of his remarks at the UN General Assembly recently, where he essentially, that was a thinly veiled threat, right? The challenge is, I don't see how this moves the needle forward in terms of the conversation, in terms of getting China to do anything, or to getting the North Korean regime to move back from where they are right now. So I think that's the real issue, is like, how is Donald Trump going to change the current situation? Because that speech didn't do it.
And also, John, in that speech, there were some carrots, not a lot of specifics on the carrots. It also came with a whole lot of sticks.
Yeah, well, I think you can't reinforce enough that if they attack us or one of our allies, that it's game over for them, that Kim Jong-un has enjoyed his last Taco Bell with Dennis Rodman on planet Earth. And I think he's getting the message.
He's getting the message, but we've heard from the statements that they put out beforehand that we're not listening, we're going to double down on our nuclear program. And Donald Trump made the point that these weapons are not making you safer, which is contrary to every part of the ounce of their being in North Korea. They believe that with nuclear weapons, that ensures the regime's survival.
Right. It makes them a player. It makes them
they play a weak hand very
on the
well.
Global stage. But again, if they do, I mean, what happens if they're shooting one of those things in the air where it's just going to be a test and something horrific happens and they end up accidentally, hitting an ally of ours? It's game over for them.
Yeah.
So they need to know that.
Okay. The president also had a message. He called on the rest of the world to act.
The time for excuses is over. Now is the time for strength. If you want peace, you must stand strong at all times.
Dave, what I found interesting about this is that, this seems to be the sort of multinational, multifaceted approach, calling everyone to come together and work on this problem. Donald Trump is a president who deals one-on-one in a transactional manner with countries. He doesn't work well in groups, right?
He's not a collaborator or someone who knows how to build consensus.
Doesn't play well with others.
Right, and he campaigned on a platform of being the isolationist guy to get us out of wars, and now he's throwing out threats all over the place. I mean, that's the challenge when you're Donald Trump, is you're alienating your allies, whether it's the NATO allies that we've got, Canada, Mexico, you name it, and he's cozying up to dictators like Vladimir Putin. I mean, there are massive, global issues like North Korea that need to be tackled through collaboration and bringing folks together, some of the key countries around the world. And Donald Trump has really alienated our key allies, and so it makes it difficult to develop solutions around issues like this.
And John, finally, how does this all resonate with what Dave was saying, with America first?
Well, I mean, national security is the first thing the government is supposed to do. And this guy could theoretically hit Guam. He could theoretically hit the Pacific coast of the United States, Hawaii. Looking out for America's national security interests is putting America
I'm looking at it
first.
from the other point of view, though. If you're the president of the United States and saying, we don't really care about anybody else, it's going to be us. We're number one. We're numero uno here from now on, guys. And then he goes out there, and says, hey, but we need your help on North Korea.
Yeah, well...
Can you give Buddy a hand here?
But ultimately, the motivation is protecting the homeland. It's protecting the Pacific Coast.
But how do other countries
Hawaii.
see this, though? I mean, are you willing to go out and help a country that says, hey, it's all about us, but now we need your help?
Well, you don't know where Rocket Man's going to point the missile. I mean, Rocket Man could point the missile at South Korea. He could point the missile at Hawaii. I think we're all in this together.
Chances are he won't point it at China, and he won't point it at Russia. Okay, you guys are going to stick around. We're going to take a short break. And if you want to know how Donald Trump's Republicans did in the latest round of U.S. elections, take a look at New Jersey Democrat Phil Murphy. He's a happy man. What made Tuesday night a very good night for Democrats? That's next here on Newsroom LA. Also ahead, the Texas church shooter had a well-known history of domestic violence and why that is a common thread in so many mass shootings. Welcome back, everybody. Democrats are riding a wave of anti-Trump sentiment to victory in Virginia. Ralph Northam won the governor's race over Republican Ed Gillespie. Democrats also won races for lieutenant governor and state attorney general, appear poised to take a majority in the Virginia State House. In New Jersey, Democrat Phil Murphy will be taking the state's top job there, which was held by Chris Christie. He beat out the current lieutenant governor. She was dragged down by dismal approval ratings for the outgoing Republican governor, Chris Christie. Okay, CNN political commentators Dave Jacobs and John Phillips back with me now. Also here in Los Angeles, Associate Professor of Public Policy at Pepperdine University, Michael Shire. So thank you all for sticking around. Michael, thank you for being with us. Okay, John, the Democrats said the governor's race in Virginia was a referendum on Donald Trump. It was a bellwether for next year's midterm elections. Tell me why they're wrong.
Because as Tip O'Neill said, all politics is local. This is a state that's gone for the Democrats in 3 consecutive presidential cycles. They have a history of electing whichever party did not win the White House to be governor, as was the case at this particular time. You look at other states where that are blue states where Republican governors are doing very well. In the state of Massachusetts, Charlie Baker is the most popular governor in the country right now. Larry Hogan in the deeply blue state of Maryland is the 2nd most popular governor in the country. So I think that the politics for this particular race were specific to that state, as is the case with state and local politics in most cases.
Dave?
I love you, John, but I don't buy that argument. There's no denying it. Like, this was a referendum on Donald Trump. Donald Trump was on the ballot. He was attached at the hip with Ed Gillespie. And the fact is, Ralph Northam outperformed Hillary Clinton with women, for example. He won with 21% of women, where Hillary only won with 17%. What was fascinating was he outperformed Donald Trump, who won with married women by 1 point, and Ralph, of course, won by a whopping 9%. So I think this was a body blow to the Republican agenda. But it's not just the top of the ticket. Like, down ballot, Democrats picked up 4 state assembly seats. They elected their first transgender member to the state house, 2 Latinas for the first time ever to the state house. So we're winning down ballot, not just top ballot. We flipped the New Jersey governor's race, of course. And then, of course, in Seattle, where there was this one sort of pivotal state Senate race for control of the upper chamber in the state of Washington, Democrats are poised to win that race as well. So this was like a blue wave night for Democrats.
You've had a lot of coffee tonight, right?
I'm just stating the facts.
Very confident.
The one thing, though, answer me this, though, because for weeks now, Democrats have been sweating bullets over this governor's race in Virginia. But why? Because, Democrats have won every statewide race there since 2009. Exit polls show that the U.S. president's approval rating among Virginian voters at 42%, a little higher than the national average, but still awful. If they couldn't win this election, then what election could they actually win? Because they haven't won any up until this point.
Right. Well, and we were texting earlier today. I was nervous about this race. I'll be upfront about it. I mean, the fact is the polls were closing in. It was a razor-thin margin. I think Northam was up by like 2 points or something like that. And look, he had some self-inflicted wounds that were totally unnecessary, where he sort of waffled on the sanctuary cities issue. And then, of course, he was getting hit for not including his lieutenant governor candidate, who's the first, or the only, African-American candidate on the ballot statewide in Virginia. And he was getting knocked for not including him on campaign mailers. Those are unforced errors that, he shouldn't have been embracing. And so I think, Democrats were nervous going into this election because, you know, those are part of the issues, but also, like, Ralph Northam is not a progressive. He's not a sort of new Democrat, not an Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders-esque kind of candidate. He's an establishment guy. And right now you do have an identity crisis within the National Democratic Party. There's no secret about that. So I think that adds credence to why Democrats were nervous, is this was kind of the establishment guy, and a lot of Democrats have been turned off by that.
Okay, Mike, just to bring you on this, the Republican Ed Gillespie, he kind of tried to have a bet each way here. He didn't really embrace Donald Trump. He didn't ask him to come to the state to campaign for him, for example, and Trump stayed away. But he did adopt a lot of these sort of Trump campaign tactics, you know, hitting immigration, race on a lot of these issues. That, though, seems to have been a losing tactic, at least in this election. So what's the takeaway here for Republicans?
Well, I mean, I don't think this is the big blue wave that Dave was talking about. I mean, this was a state that's gone Democrat a lot lately, and it went Democrat. I think it's a sigh of relief for Democrats because they took an election that a year ago they got their heads handed to them, and it turned around this time, and it actually went the way they thought it was going to go. And I actually give Hillary Clinton a lot of credit for this race because I think it was her poor performance last time that got the Democratic Party so focused and energized that they've been able to turn out as well as they have. I think on the Republican side, I don't fault Ed Gillespie as much as I fault a national Republican Party that really hasn't stood for anything and really hasn't accomplished anything as a party. And I think it was really hard for him. I mean, he tried to tie into the Trump agenda, but the Trump agenda hasn't gone very far yet. And so I don't think there was any momentum for him to borrow from there. So I really think this was more about the last election and the Democrats kind of getting their act together in Virginia more than it was, you know, is this going to be a precursor of what happens in the midterms next year?
Okay, in his victory speech, Governor Northam seemed to direct some of his comments, at least, to the president and Republicans who follow his politics.
Today, Virginians have answered and have spoken. Virginia has told us to end the divisiveness, that we will not condone hatred and bigotry, and to end the politics that have torn this country apart.
So, John, that's it. It's all going to be friendly and nice from now on. No more of this gutter politics that we've seen for the last year or so.
Who would have thought that this guy would think that his election was the pivotal moment in American politics that changed the direction of the country? They have a screwy system where they have term limits where you can only serve one 4-year term. Terry McAuliffe, the Democrat incumbent, is very popular there. His lieutenant governor ran and was elected. I don't see this as being something that's going to change the course of American politics. I will say this, though, that the white people with college degrees that did turn out for Northam this time and voted for Hillary Clinton in the last presidential election, that is a trend that I think you will see in areas like Northern Virginia where they work for the government. But the exact opposite is true in states like Ohio, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, where people who work in different industries, people who don't work for the government, are trending in the opposite direction. I think the problems the Democrats had before are the same today, and the problem that the Republicans had before are the same today as well.
Okay, Dave, I'm just curious though, because one of the criticisms of Gillespie is that he didn't embrace Trump, but at the same time he used sort of Trumpian tactics. So do Republicans look at that down the track and say, okay, we've got to move away from that kind of campaigning, race and immigration, that sort of stuff, or do they just go full throttle, embrace that sort of Trump campaign tactics and embrace the president?
Well, look, I think, a 9-point loss is substantial. Yeah. And, I think if I'm a Republican, I'm thinking back to what Barack Obama said, I think, after the 2010 election, which was, we had a shellacking tonight, right? So clearly the Trump tactic didn't work. And I think also, look, you're seeing in the national polling where Donald Trump's approval rating is starting to tick down below what we've seen historically, which has been around the mid-30s. Yeah. The floor's starting to come out, and independents and sort of soft Republican Trump people are starting to peel away from the president. I think he's hovering around 33 or 34% approval rating. So all these other Republicans who are campaigning, whether it's 2017 or 2018, they're riding Trump's coattails. And I think you're going to start to see some space and a little bit of a gap between, them embracing him moving forward as we look to 2018.
Yep. Okay, even though the president is in Asia, he did weigh in before dawn with 3 tweets on behalf of Gillespie, critical of Democrat Northam. This is what they read. Ralph Northam will allow crime to be rampant in Virginia. He's weak on crime, weak on our great vets, anti-Second Amendment, and has been horrible on Virginia economy. Also, this vote Ed Gillespie today. Ed Gillespie will totally turn around the high crime and poor economic performance of Virginia. MS-13, which is a crime gang, and crime will be gone. Vote today, ASAP. But when the results came in and it was clear that he'd lost, Ed Gillespie worked hard but did not embrace me or what I stand for. Don't forget, Republicans won 4 out of 4 House seats, and with the economy doing record numbers, we will continue to win even bigger than before. Michael, this is the second time in the past few months the president has backed a losing candidate. What is the impact of this loss for a president who's already pretty badly weakened?
Well, I mean, President Trump is still trying to get some of his agenda through Congress. And if he gets a win there, then all of this goes away. You have these little wins and these little losses along the way. But the bottom line is, if his agenda moves forward, if he's able to, for example, get the tax legislation through, I think that's going to be transformative, and that's really going to define the midterm elections. It's not going to be whether a candidate in a state where the Democrats got really well organized, in my opinion, and came out and turned out the vote, actually managed to beat one of the candidates he endorsed.
Yeah, the headline really, Democrats win Virginia isn't, really shocking at the end of the day. But Michael, thank you for being with us. Welcome to the show for the first time. Also, John and Dave, as always, thank you. Up next here on Newsroom LA, there are new details on the violent past of the Texas church gunman. We will hear from a survivor of that massacre who says the shooter went after everyone he saw moving. Welcome back, everybody. You're watching CNN Newsroom live from Los Angeles. I'm John Vors. Now, according to a police report, the Texas church shooter, Devin Kelley, escaped from a mental health facility 5 years ago after threatening military commanders. And despite a history of jail time for domestic violence, he passed background checks and legally purchased a number of firearms because the U.S. Air Force failed to report his conviction. Kelley had attended the church where he killed 25 people and an unborn child. The pastor of the church, whose 14-year-old daughter was among those killed, said he did not want Kelley as part of his congregation. And from one survivor, a harrowing account of what happened inside that church last Sunday, Roseanne Solis tells our Sarah Seidner what she saw and what she heard as victims as young as 17 months old died nearby.
Yeah, he said he heard him. I didn't because I had my ears covered. What do you say? Joaquin, everybody die. That's what he said. Everybody's going to die. That's what he said.
When he came in, can you describe what you thought the minute you saw him? Was he shooting as he was walking in the door?
Yeah, he was going through the aisles all around with his, it wasn't a handgun, it was a pistol or, he was looking all around and shooting at everybody, just going through the rows, shooting at everybody. First, he went in straight to where the guys that sing, they were up there. He shot them first. And the lady, I guess their mom or I don't know, they're related, I know. But yeah, all that family got shot. Yeah. He's the one that saw his face. I didn't because I just saw his feet. So I didn't even want to move. I knew that was going to be my last day to live. I did not even want to look at it. I was hiding under the bench. I did not want to breathe, look, nothing.
What happens next?
So what happened next, he was shooting. As he was shooting down, we could see me and him were, he was trying to put his head on top of me so he could, try to prevent the bullets from coming down on us. And all of us were together. It was me, him, and some other, a little boy, and that we were all laying around each other and screaming. And what happened next, I told him to get out of there because this was going to be our last day to live. I told him, try to go somewhere where they're not shooting, save yourself. I told him, because I know I'm going to die here. I knew I was going to die. So he went kind of like towards the back of the church. I just went, at that time, I don't even know what happened after that because he disappeared and I was still there with the rest of the people there. And the guy was still shooting. He was shooting, I think he shot more than 300 shots. So then it stopped for about, I would say like 5 minutes. And then I guess he must have reloaded and started again. Yeah, he reloaded. He had a second time to reload his gun and started shooting again. all these people screaming and bleeding, and nobody would get there to save us from from the shooter. So he's inside. After that, after the second round, he was up there for a while. I guess seconds must have gone by, minutes, maybe at least 5 more minutes. And he was shooting, and everybody, I could just see the people, the bullets were coming right down. I could see it on the carpet, the bullets passing me like that, and I could see it on the carpet. I said, if I don't move from here, I'm gonna die.
Can you tell me where you were?
I was on the left, on the left bench. When you come inside, there's benches to the left and to the right. I was under the bench. Yeah.
When did you know you were hit? Like, how did you?
I didn't feel it because I had taken my pain pill. I didn't feel it that much, but I saw blood coming out because I had taken my hydrocodone that I take for pain because I have a bone disease. And I went like that and I saw the blood, but I knew I had been hit. I could feel it then.
Your husband saw his face. You did not, but.
No, he did. He saw him when he ran outside.
Did you ever see him?
And when he came inside, he saw him.
Was he wearing a mask?
No, he wasn't wearing a mask. Joaquin, he was not wearing a mask. No traía a mask, right? He wasn't wearing a mask. I just saw his shoes. I didn't want to look up or nothing to see. He saw where he was going so he could run out of the church. He was paying attention to him when he went up and shot the people that were up in the front, the guys, the family that passed away. And he was watching them so he could go through the front door. Because he was like going through the aisles, shooting, looking, walking around with his rifle.
Had you seen the shooter before?
Not me. He saw him outside, but this was a couple of months back, about 6 months back, that he saw him outside of the church.
Did you pretend that you were dead as he walked by you?
Yeah. He didn't walk by me. He did not walk by me. He was in the middle. Right when you go inside the door, he was in the aisle, and he was pointing his rifle like that. He was looking, look over here, look over there, and he was just shooting at everybody. Everything that would move or he could see.
So when you got up, you saw what he did?
He left, I got up. When he left, at least, I waited 15 minutes or 20 minutes before I went outside. I wasn't about to go out there knowing that it was still dangerous.
What did you see when you got up?
Blood, dead people, dead bodies, dead children all over the place, outside. People screaming, looking for each other. Just terrible, terrible. All dead little bodies, dead with a whole bunch of blood, and a terrible scene. It's just something that I want to think about anymore because it's always going to be there. But it was just horrible.
Gosh, a harrowing account there. And with that, we'll take a short break here. When we come back, U.S. President Donald Trump on his way to China, expected to touch down in Beijing at any moment now. This comes after sending a very stark warning to the North Koreans. Welcome back, everybody. It seems the U.S. President Donald Trump has just touched down at China's capital, Beijing. There is Air Force One on the tarmac. The stairs have gone up. We're now waiting for the president to come out. It is 2:43 in the afternoon. A lot of people believe that this trip by Donald Trump to China, a 2-day stopover, will be the most important of this 12-day-long trip to Asia, one of the longest taken by any president to Asia, and certainly the longest trip for this U.S. president. Just hours earlier, before arriving in Beijing, Donald Trump addressed the National Assembly in Seoul, South Korea, and there he had a very blunt warning for the North Koreans, demanding an end to their nuclear program, also their illicit missile program as well. And during that speech, he actually called on China and Russia to do a lot more to end that nuclear program. And of course, that is now one of the key takeaways from this 2-day meeting in China. Will Beijing actually be willing to do any more to try and end that nuclear program and missile program of the North Koreans? China, of course, is North Korea's best friend, only friend really in the world. A relationship between those two countries described as close as lips and teeth during the days of Chairman Mao. Donald Trump also warned the North Koreans, don't underestimate us, don't take us on. It was a fairly stark warning in very Trumpian terms. As we wait for the President and the First Lady to deplane, as they like to say, we'll go to Matt Rivers, who is actually live in Beijing. We also have Daniel Lynch in Hong Kong. He's a professor at the City University of Hong Kong. Okay, Matt, so, Beijing, it seems it's pulling out all the stops here for a very, very warm welcome for the U.S. president. What can we expect?
Yeah, this is going to be a highly symbolic visit here in Beijing. The government here calling it a super state visit because of the special things that Donald Trump is going to be able to take part in. It's going to start this evening at the Forbidden City inside the old Imperial Palace here in Beijing, where the president and the First Lady will get a tour alongside China's First Lady and Chinese President Xi Jinping. But perhaps more symbolic than just the tour is the fact that they're going to be eating dinner inside the Forbidden City. It might seem like a minor point there, but no U.S. president has ever been given that honor. And so the Chinese are definitely really rolling out the red carpet for Donald Trump, giving him an honor, something that he can point to and say, look, no other U.S. president has done this. I have a good relationship with Xi Jinping, and you can prove it because we had dinner inside the Forbidden City. So China is definitely engaging in showing Donald Trump a good time, showing him that he's respected here in China, and they're hoping that that will have an impact on what they're able to accomplish from a diplomatic standpoint. It's also worth noting, John, that Xi Jinping is doing that for his own domestic political audience as well, saying that he can have dinner in a place where emperors once ruled China. We know that Xi Jinping has consolidated more power than any other Chinese leader since Chairman Mao. So Xi Jinping really putting himself on the same toe-to-toe, really, with Donald Trump, two major world leaders that Xi Jinping views them as equals.
Daniel, just to pick up on that point about the way the Chinese are describing this visit, China's ambassador to Washington described the trip as a state visit plus. I've never heard that term used before. He went on to say featuring talks, military honor guard, and formal banquets, and some special arrangements, whatever that is. It does seem that Xi Jinping has learned from France's Emmanuel Macron, knowing that Donald Trump likes a show. Is this a case of flatter the ego and win the heart?
Yeah, I think we need to keep in mind, though, John, that unlike Russia, China under Xi Jinping has a real interest in the United States maintaining political stability and international strength. I mean, I think there are probably many opportunities for Xi Jinping during the last year to bait President Trump, to try to get him to do something that he might regret, that might cause the United States to lose face or suffer some soft power hits internationally. He's refrained from doing that. I think it underscores that China recognizes, again, unlike Russia, that in order for China's rise to continue, in order for its economic growth to continue, even at rates lower than, but still healthy than in the recent past, it really needs a strong and stable United States. And so, but I also think, so the welcome will be really warm and impressive, but I would also highlight the impressive part. When Donald Trump rides in from the airport into the center of Beijing, he'll ride down those wide thoroughfares with those huge, tall, imposing buildings into Tiananmen Square. He's bound to be, I think if he's like any other person, awestruck and really recognize he's in the center of an imperial capital of a very strong China.
Yeah, that drive from the airport down to the Forbidden City to Tiananmen Square, yes, it is very impressive. And the Chinese pull out all the stops. They beautify the city, they stop the factories so there's no pollution, they plant the flowers, they make the place look amazing. But what is interesting, though, is, despite, what's on the surface, if you look at what's behind the surface, here in the US, we've just had this election, in Virginia, New Jersey, but Virginia is the one where the Democrats have swept the field. There's been this anti-Trump wave, if you like. Donald Trump's opinion polls are, at their lowest. We're seeing Republicans, resign out of protest because of his leadership style. This is a president, under investigation, over Russia's involvement in the election, and how close the Trump campaign whatever role the Trump campaign played, in that. This is a president who is not in a very strong position, negotiating with Xi Jinping, a president who has, is in an incredibly strong position, the strongest position in China since Mao Zedong. That's a huge power imbalance right now for these two men.
It is, and I think that's why President Trump will want some deliverables, that he can take home some promises that I think Chinese companies, whether private or state-owned or some combination thereof, will make to purchase some U.S. goods, maybe even to invest in U.S. infrastructure, because, of course, President Trump needs some victories on this trip. And I think because, again, of the strategic interest that China under Xi Jinping has in the United States remaining stable and prosperous, that the Chinese side will give him some of those concrete victories.
And we're just watching the U.S. President and the First Lady leave, walking down the stairs from Air Force One. They're being greeted there on the tarmac. Can't see who's making up the delegation there, who's actually greeting the president, but you can see this is just the start of the pomp and circumstance for the president's visit to Beijing. And so, Matt Rivers, just to bring you back into all of this, one of the things that the president is looking for is obviously progress on North Korea, but there's also a whole bunch of other issues, in particular trade, that he needs to be resolved, and he's hoping to go back to the U.S. with some of those wins under his belt. Specifically, what are they?
Well, one of the things that we've talked to a lot about here with American companies based here, American businessmen and women based here, have been talking about access to China's markets. One of the things that we've spoken a lot about here is the fact that China really, according to these people we've spoken to, has an unequal playing field for American business getting access to the Chinese market. For example, having to partner with Chinese companies. If you want to build cars here in China, if you're Ford, for example, you need to partner with a Chinese company. You need to give certain quality control secrets to the Chinese. You have to show the best practices, that kind of information with the Chinese. And what American companies say is that that makes their competitive balance, it skews it, and it puts it in favor of the Chinese. You see the Chinese government favoring nascent industry. So that's one of the things he's going to be looking at, getting American companies a more equal playing field here in China.
Yes, the dreaded joint venture with a state-owned company in China. Matt and Daniel, I'd like you to stay with us. We are watching the U.S. president about to get into the limousine and do that very impressive drive from the airport into the city. It is 1:51 right here on the East Coast. It is 2:51 in the afternoon in Beijing. We will take a short break, and we'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back, everybody. A short time ago, U.S. President Donald Trump touched down in Air Force One in Beijing. It is now going on 3 p.m. there in China's capital. He will be wined and dined by communist leaders in the Forbidden City, a rare honor for what is arguably the world's most famous capitalist, and the first time a U.S. president has actually had that experience. He arrives in Beijing after a visit to Seoul in South Korea, and while addressing the National Assembly there, Donald Trump had a very stern warning for the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, saying don't underestimate or try the U.S. He also offered the hope, maybe, of diplomatic talks to resolve the standoff with the North Koreans over their nuclear and missile programs. You're watching CNN Newsroom live from Los Angeles. We will have a lot more on this very significant visit by the U.S. president to Beijing in the next hour. We'll be back after a short break.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Hello and welcome to our viewers in the United States and around the world. I'm John Fors, live in Los Angeles, where it has just turned 11 o'clock here on the West Coast. U.S. President Donald Trump is now in Beijing, the third stop on his Asia tour, which some have said will call for delicate diplomacy as he pushes China to do more to end North Korea's nuclear program. Hours earlier at South Korea's National Assembly, the president condemned North Korea's oppressive regime while praising Seoul's accomplishments over the past 7 decades. He said America does not seek conflict with North Korea but will not run from it either. And he issued another stark warning to Kim Jong-un.
Today, I hope I speak not only for our countries, but for all civilized nations when I say to the North, do not underestimate us and do not try us.
Joining us now, CNN's Matt Rivers in Beijing, also Paula Hancock's in Seoul. And Paula, let's just start with that speech to the National Assembly there. Many lawmakers in South Korea were a little nervous that Donald Trump's remarks might raise tensions with Pyongyang. But apart from plugging his golf course, this seemed to be a typical speech from a U.S. president, maybe, tougher in tone, but it was met with a standing ovation.
That's right, yes, 35 minutes, a standing ovation at the end, although to be fair, he had a standing ovation when he came in as well. It's a slightly different tack than we've been seeing from the US president, that's for sure. There were no direct threats to totally destroy North Korea. There were no personal insults against the North Korean leader. But really, the very blunt criticism and insults that he was levelling at the country may actually annoy North Korea even further, pointing out the stark contrasts between the North and the South, talking about the South's successes and then talking about the North Koreans' human rights abuses, the gulags, the fact that they had a devastated famine in the 1990s, the fact that the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is more concerned with pumping money into a nuclear and missile program than being able to feed his own people. Now, all of this is based on fact, but it was put forward in a very forceful way, almost an emotional way, almost putting himself on the moral high ground, and then also questioning how others could let this happen, how other countries could support such a regime. So certainly it was a fairly strong speech, John.
It was a strong speech, and part of that speech was calling on China to do more. So, Matt, over to you in Beijing. We've heard this a lot from this administration in Washington, this demand for China to do more to end the nuclear threat coming from North Korea. And Donald Trump actually arrives there in Beijing with Congress back in Washington moving closer to approving sanctions which will specifically target Chinese banks and companies which do business with the North. So that gives that at least some teeth to that demand, I guess.
Yeah, and what the Chinese are going to say to Donald Trump is that they don't believe that those so-called secondary sanctions are the way forward. They believe the only way to really solve this ongoing crisis is through bilateral negotiation between the United States and North Korea. That said, the Chinese would say that they've already signed on to some of the toughest sanctions ever imposed against North Korea. Those sanctions couldn't go forward without China's approval, given their veto power on the UN Security Council. So China says they're doing enough already, but really that brings us to this stalemate that has existed between the United States and China throughout the entirety of Donald Trump's presidency. The Trump administration's tune on China has not changed. They want China to use their economic leverage to force North Korea to stop developing weapons. And China says we're not willing to do anything to cut off the trade in such a way that could cause the Kim Jong-un regime to collapse. They say it would cause a humanitarian crisis and makes things worse. In reality, it also has a lot to do with their geopolitical strategy, as North Korea as a buffer state between South Korea and the U.S. troops there. But we're really at a stalemate, John. It'll be interesting to see if either leader can really force the other one to move in a different direction.
Just very quickly, Matt, have they cleared the skies of the pollution? Is it a blue sky day?
You know, yes, it is. It's a blue sky day. Maybe the factories have been shut down. It's cloudy now, but we had blue skies in the morning. No pollution today.
It's amazing what they can do when they want to. Matt Rivers there on a blue sky day in Beijing, and Paula Hancock's there in Seoul. Thanks to you both. A lot more on this now. Our political panel joins us. We have our commentators Dave Jacobson as well as John Phillips. Also here in Los Angeles, Associate Professor of Public Policy at Pepperdine University, Michael Shires. Okay, so... the U.S. president was giving the standing ovation. Paula Hancock said it went for 35 minutes. There was extended applause throughout the speech. So, Dave, the South Koreans, I guess, they liked what they heard, or were they just relieved that he didn't insult Kim Jong-un and start a war or something?
I think it's probably the latter.
Really?
It's unfortunate. But, yeah, I mean... The fact is we haven't had a tweet storm regarding North Korea in a couple days, which is a good thing.
Well, Twitter is blocked in China, but he should be able to get access to Twitter.
I'm sure the President of the United States will have access if he really wants to Twitter.
But that, you say that, but that is actually a real danger in these negotiations, is that the President, gets up in the middle of the night and reads something, gets upset, and tweets.
Absolutely. And so I think that's a big question is he going to do something to really create a disaster scenario for his China trip? Pardon me. But look, I think with his speech tonight, I think he's setting himself up somewhat for failure because he's really trying to intensify the pressure on Russia and China. But the fact is they just increased sanctions. Obviously, on a personal level, I support tougher sanctions, but I just don't see any movement on that front. We haven't seen any indication at all that China is willing to do anything more than what they've already done. And so that's the big question is if he comes back without any deliverables on that front, is he going to look like a weaker president than he did going into this trip?
Okay. John, one thing which the president does deserve credit for was highlighting the appalling human rights abuses of the North Korean regime. It has been it seems a long time since the U.S. president went into that much detail on this global stage like President Trump did.
That's right. He said North Korea is hell, and I disagree with him on one point. North Korea is worse than hell, because at least in hell they have the furnace turned on and Kim Jong-il is there to entertain you with riddles. In North Korea, they have nothing. Those people are eating tree bark. And that's a theme, too, that most of our allies, or all of our allies, can sign on to. The countries that he's visiting right now, even China, even Russia, if they're honest about it, they have to admit that the human rights atrocities that are going on in North Korea are unconscionable and need to be condemned, both with them in the region and at the United Nations.
Is the problem, though, if you call out North Korea's human rights abuses, then you have to do that everywhere around the world where there are similar abuses going on?
Well, right now, North Korea is the problem.
Sure, but there are other places where it's pretty awful.
Right, absolutely. But right now, we have what's on our plate. And right now, North Korea is firing missiles off into the ocean over our allies. So we got to take care of this now before it becomes a disaster.
Okay, Michael, the tone from the president's speech in Seoul a few hours ago, you know, it was tough. It was fairly Donald Trump. But at least, you know, there's this talk of diplomacy, of trying to find a way out of this. The problem is opening demand is a complete non-starter. You know, the North Koreans have made it clear that they will never give up their nuclear program. And it seems that, you know, the president here is learning what other presidents have learned over the years.
Well, it's a hard lesson to learn, too. I mean, the reality is he's stuck between a rock and a hard place. I do think he has some leverage with the Chinese that people aren't really focused on, which is we trade a lot with them, and Trump made a big campaign plank that he was going to change the trade relationship with China. So the shape of those changes are something that is on the table and can be negotiated. So I actually think there's some significant leverage with the Chinese. I think it's kind of ironic that, you know, for him to influence the North Koreans, he has to turn to the Chinese and the Russians. With all the concerns about Russian collusion with the Trump administration, you'd think he could just pick up the phone and ask Vladimir Putin to do what he wants.
You'd think. Before the president made that address in Seoul to the National Assembly, officials in Pyongyang told CNN this: "We will ever more strongly reforge the blade of our treasured sword of justice and defend our independence with our righteous nuclear weapons and open up a new era of national prosperity with that treasured sword." Which means they're not giving up their nuclear weapons. So, Michael, you know, in the past, the goal of diplomacy and talks has been essentially to put limits on North Korea's nuclear program. Is the president here making some sort of big opening play and he's willing to walk it back, or do you think that's it?
I think he would count progress. You know, if he could get the ballistic missiles off the table, I think that would be progress, because, I mean, our national security threat and the Japanese are affected by those. I think if you were to get some restraints on it, if you were to get some external verification and control on those facilities, I mean, I think any form of real progress, substantive, verifiable progress, is something he's going to be shooting for. In an ideal world, we get them to give up their nuclear weapons. I agree. I think that's a long uphill battle. But if you do manage to enlist the Russians and the Chinese as your allies in this, the North Koreans may not have any choice.
Okay, I'd like all of you to stay with us, because it's been a big night here in the U.S. as far as elections and politics, and Democrats have been riding an anti-Donald Trump wave in elections in Virginia as well as New Jersey. CNN is projecting Democrat Ralph Northam will be the next governor of Virginia. He beat out the Republican lobbyist and Trump supporter Ed Gillespie. Trump tried to distance himself from the defeat, tweeting this: "Ed Gillespie worked hard but did not embrace me or what I stand for. Don't forget, Republicans won 4 out of 4 House seats, and with the economy doing record numbers, we will continue to win even bigger than before." In New Jersey, meantime, Democrat Phil Murphy will move into the governor's mansion. He will be replacing the very unpopular Republican governor, Chris Christie. Exit polls show the president's approval rating there at 36%.
With Donald Trump in the White House, Jeff Sessions as Attorney General, polluters running the EPA, zealots heading the Department of Education, and Steve Bannon holding Republicans in Congress hostage, governors will have never mattered more.
Okay, back to the panel now. Okay, so let's focus on that race in Virginia, because that was the big one. That was the bellwether, if you like. Okay, so Dave, tell me how this is the start of the anti-Trump wave, how this is all about the Democrats retaking the lower house, the House of Reps at the midterms. And John, then you can follow up by telling me why he's completely wrong and Gillespie never embraced Donald Trump and it's all Gillespie's fault.
Well, it's clear that this obviously was a referendum against the president. Any Republican who's running across the country, top of the ticket, bottom of the ticket, you're running on Donald Trump's coattails. There's no way to avoid that. And the fact is, this is a significant win. I mean, it was a 9-point shellacking, as President Obama said back in 2010, but against the opposing party. I mean, look, the fact is Democrats won up at the top of the ballot, and they won down ballot. We won the lieutenant governor's race, the attorney general's race. We picked up 4 seats in the state assembly in Virginia. And so I think if you read the tea leaves, this could be the beginning of a potential blue wave that we're going to see in the 2018 election, which is about a year from now. And I think you're seeing historic low approval ratings with the president, right? He's hovering around 33%, which is unprecedented for a president in their first year. So look, it's still early, of course, but if you look at the generic ballot for Congress, Democrats are leading by double digits.
Okay.
In regard to the tweet, what is the saying? Success has 1,000 fathers and failure is an orphan. Yeah, I think we saw a little bit of that play itself out. But all politics is local. This is a blue state. This is a state that's been voting Democrat. They have 2 Democratic senators. They have a very popular Democratic incumbent governor. Governors in the state of Virginia are only allowed to run for 1 term. This was the lieutenant governor essentially running for what would be the 2nd term of the Terry McAuliffe administration. The surprising thing to me is that the Republicans had a shot at this, and this thing tightened up as much as it did at the end. Every possible advantage was going to the Democrats, and I would add this point to the national perspective. Donald Trump's numbers aren't good right now, that's true, but they never were good. They weren't good during the campaign. He beat Hillary Clinton, and the Democrats right now have numbers that are in the toilet. I think that they've had their lowest number in quite some time as a party. So I don't think you can take too much from this race outside of the fact that in Virginia, the Democrats are on their way up.
Okay. So, Michael, what's the reality? Break it down.
I get to play referee here.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's a little of both, actually. I mean, I think the Virginia Democratic Party did a fantastic job organizing. They had a tough primary. They brought the party together. I think that's a lesson for them going into the midterms. It's not about running against Russia. It's not about running against Trump. It's about creating a positive message of unity. That's what worked for them. At the same time, I think there's a little bit of a hangover from last year's election. A lot of the workers in Washington, D.C. live in Northern Virginia. They woke up a year ago and said, what happened? This time they made sure that it wouldn't happen again, and they worked really hard to organize locally to make sure that the result came out the way they did. And it's not just at the top of the ticket. They actually, I haven't seen the latest results. I know they had a shot at actually taking over the House of Delegates as well, which would be remarkable. That would be 17 seats they'd have to flip.
Okay, well, this race in Virginia started out friendly enough, but then towards the end, with a few weeks to go, Ed Gillespie, the Republican, tried some Trump tactics, hitting on issues like immigration and race and running ads like this one. Only aired this commercial once or twice, but it was roundly criticized.
Is this what Donald Trump and Ed Gillespie mean by the American dream?
Yes, running immigrant children, Latino children down with pickup trucks with Confederate flags on the back. It was awful. I mean, all the ads. I mean, people in Washington, D.C. are going to be relieved this election's over because these ads were horrendous. But, John, it seems most of the awful ads are coming on the Gillespie side, and he lost. Does that mean that Republicans now look at this and say, hey, maybe we need to change the strategy here?
Oh, come on, John. On the cattiness scale, this is not a blip. We just had a presidential election where they were doing everything but throwing Chardonnay in each other's faces. This was nothing. So, look, I mean, in a country where you have a president whose approval rating is in the 30s and you have a Democratic Party whose approval rating is in the 30s, any issue that splits 50-50 is a winner from their perspective. The fact of the matter is that the exit polling, they asked people about the Confederate statues, for example, and it turns out the vast majority of Virginians wanted to keep the statues up. I don't think the cultural issues are winners for the Democrats, particularly in states even like Virginia that are as blue as that state.
So, Dave?
Well, I don't think the cultural issues clearly, according to election results that we saw today, are a winning issue for Republicans, right? I mean, Republicans in Virginia campaign on exploiting racial stereotypes. The Republicans sent out mail pieces embracing Donald Trump's call where NFL players ought to stand up for the Pledge of Allegiance. I think the reality is these aren't winning issues for Republicans. You got to be talking about at a time where there's so much chaos and anxiety across the country because Washington's not getting anything done. What you need and what Americans are looking for is real collaborators, people who are going to get stuff done and move an agenda forward. And I think the problem is Donald Trump's brand is the embodiment of divisiveness and chaos.
The Republicans didn't put out the ad running over a child.
But they put out a bunch of horrible other ads as well.
I thought that was, frankly, I thought it was a very compelling ad.
But very quickly, Michael, what was interesting, one of the exit polls I saw, the people who voted for Northam, the Democrat, I think 35%, the top issue for them was health care. And that seems to be a very big issue. Could that be a big issue moving forward?
Well, it's going to be. I mean, whatever shape the healthcare system ends up in right before the election next year, I think is going to sway a lot of votes. I mean, this is an area where Congress should have bipartisan initiatives to try and deal with some of the problems. Everybody agrees the system's broken. They're just, this is where hopefully some of those theoretical moderates, which might exist in the legislature, can come together. I think President Trump at this point is desperate enough for a win that he will sign legislation if they get it to him. The challenge is going to be getting it to him. And I think that, one of the messages for this campaign going forward, especially for Republicans after Virginia, has to be they need to produce some things that they can run on. And right now they don't have much on their plate that they can say we've accomplished. And going into the midterms, if they don't have that, it may turn out even worse than they thought.
And just on that note, we're going to wrap it up here, but it was interesting that when Donald Trump was in Seoul, he was talking about his accomplishments and he mentioned Neil Gorsuch being appointed to the Supreme Court. Which I thought was an
warmed over
moment.
talking point.
Exactly. there's not a lot to talk about, I guess. Dave and John, and also Michael there as well. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll take a break. When we come back, the Texas church shooter had a well-known history of domestic violence, and yet he was still able to legally buy guns. We'll have more on that in a moment. Also, a new bill before the U.S. House calls for examining a link between domestic violence and mass shootings. We'll look at the chilling numbers in just a moment. Welcome back, everybody. The violent past of the Texas church shooter should have prevented him from legally purchasing a firearm. According to a police report, Devin Kelly also escaped from a mental health facility 5 years ago. Also passed background checks because the U.S. Air Force failed to report he'd been convicted of domestic assault. And now a Democratic lawmaker is pushing for legislation to study why a history of domestic violence is a common thread in so many mass shootings. For more on that, psychologist Wendy Walsh joins us now here in Los Angeles. Wendy, it is good to see you. Thank you for coming by. As all these details emerge about the shooter here, we're hearing about his violent history. It's really becoming clear that he's sort of fitting this pattern or this, this example of a connection between domestic violence and mass shootings. So explain a little bit more about that.
Well, the numbers are interesting. I think it's more than 50% of mass shooters have also engaged in domestic violence at some point in their life. That doesn't necessarily suggest causality. In other words, if you commit domestic violence, that means you're going to go on to escalate to commit a mass shooting. However, it does show there's some correlation. And I would say, looking at it psychologically, that we're talking about somebody with, some major personality disorders, some early life trauma, and where our psychosis plays out first is in our most intimate relationships. It's almost like you've heard the saying, we save the most sadistic parts of our personalities for those we love the most.
Yeah, we hurt the ones we love the most.
Yes, right. And even in healthy relationships, that is true, but it doesn't turn into violence. So the question really is, can we use this knowledge that we have to prevent mass shootings in the future?
Okay, well, let's look at some of the numbers, because Every Town for Gun Safety, which is a group set up after the massacre at Sandy Hook Elementary, they looked at mass shootings in the U.S. where 4 or more people were killed between 2009 and 2016, a total of 161 shootings, which left more than 800 people dead. And they found in at least 54% of mass shootings, that's 85, the perpetrator shot a current or former intimate partner or family member. These domestic violence mass shootings resulted in 422 victims being killed, more than 40% of whom were children. The numbers tell a really compelling story here, but what we still don't have, what we still haven't established, is this direct link between domestic violence and mass shootings, how they are linked, if you like.
Well, psychologically, you could go to simply say that that is the practice ground. That is the intimate place where, in the privacy of one's home, somebody with a major anger and rage issue and potentially a chemical problem, neurochemistry problem, that's where they begin, and that's where it begins. So, is the route to stopping mass shootings beginning with intimate partner violence? I think yes.
The canary in the coal mine.
I think it is I think domestic violence is the canary in the coal mine when it comes to mass shootings. This is our first line of knowledge that something's off. Now, I also think domestic violence is highly underreported. 1 in 4 American women will suffer domestic violence in their lifetime, and much of it goes unreported. Even if charges are laid, sometimes charges are dropped. So if we are talking about potential gun regulation, do we say everybody who's been convicted of domestic violence or domestic violence has been reported on them?
But all this is worth looking at, because this is such a huge problem that this country seems paralyzed by at the moment. Because when you throw a gun into the mix, there's one study out there that found the chances a woman will be shot and killed increases 5-fold.
Yes, and if a woman owns a gun herself for her own protection, there's much more chance that that gun will be used against her rather than to protect her. So, we look at the data, but I think convincing people that legislative change needs to happen isn't really about the facts. Right. It's more about changing people's idea. I mean, I think we need more people on the right, more conservative people, more validators from law enforcement, from the military, trusted people to come forward and say, look, I mean, police officers say getting a call for a domestic violence call is the most dangerous situation they can be put in. And they know that, right? So why don't we start at the beginning and get the guns out of the hands of domestic violence perpetrators? Okay,
with that in mind, the Speaker of the House, Republican Paul Ryan, was asked about is there a need to tighten the laws on gun owners? And his reply was essentially, there was a problem. This guy shouldn't have passed a background check.
This man should not have gotten a gun. You know why? Because he was a domestic abuser. We have laws in the books that says if you're a domestic abuser, you're not supposed to own a gun. He was a domestic abuser. That's why we got all these questions with the Air Force right now, which is, how did this get slipped through the cracks? How is it that this person who was convicted of domestic abuse by the Air Force, how did he get through the system and get a gun? Because the laws we have right now on the books say a person like this should not have gotten a gun.
And that's true, because he was married to the woman that he was abusing. Yeah. What if they're not married? What if it's the girlfriend loophole? So, what if the woman who is abused drops the charges down from a felony to a misdemeanor? What if she doesn't report it in the first place?
So I have two questions here. One is the Air Force's criminal database, is it shared with gun background checks, or is that a private thing, right? Yep. Okay, so there's the loophole there. There is something also called the boyfriend loophole. So if you're married to the woman, if you have children with the woman, then, and you've been convicted, then you cannot own a gun. But if you've just dated and decided to shoot someone, it's okay. You can get another gun.
Yeah,
Yeah, the boyfriend loophole. We got to close that one up.
Okay, well, that seems easy, right?
Yeah.
We'll see.
I think
Wendy,
so.
good to see you. Thank you so much.
You.
Well, the US president is in China, where he is set to attend a history-making dinner inside the Forbidden City, where many of the emperors once lived. We'll talk about the symbolism, all of that just ahead. Welcome back, everybody. You're watching CNN Newsroom live from Los Angeles. I'm John Forbes. Donald Trump, the U.S. president, has arrived in Beijing, the third stop of a 12-day tour of Asia. Right now, he is actually in the Forbidden City, and he will be there for some time. This is where the Communist Party leadership will wine and dine the U.S. president. A rare honor, apparently never bestowed before on a U.S. president. A sign of essentially how much the communist government there wants to woo Donald Trump. They are rolling out all the stops for him on this visit. It is a 2-night stay there in Beijing. And of course, the biggest issue Donald Trump would like to have resolved by the time he leaves will be pushing China to do more to rein in the North Koreans and their illicit nuclear missile programs. If that happens, it will be a major accomplishment. Most, though, believe that it will not. Just a few hours earlier, Donald Trump was in Seoul, South Korea, addressing the National Assembly there, and he did call out North Korea. He did issue a very blunt warning, essentially saying, don't test us. He did also offer the hope of diplomacy. And during that speech, he also said he wanted China and Russia, among others, to do more to rein in the North Koreans. Well, for more on this, CNN's Matt Rivers live in Beijing this hour. Also, Daniel Lynch is in Hong Kong. He's an associate professor of international relations at the University of Southern California. And Daniel, just first to you, there's the whining and the dining. There's all the pomp and circumstance here. That does not necessarily mean that Donald Trump is going to get his way.
No, and I think that pomp and circumstance actually cuts both ways. On the one hand, it's designed to appeal to Trump's ego and to show him, as I think you used the term last hour, show him a really good time and impress him. On the other hand, too, this is going to really impress Donald Trump. So he's made the ride in from the airport into the center of Beijing. He's traveled down those broad boulevards with the tall buildings, and of course he's a president who's unusually impressed by tall and strong buildings. I think it really communicates that China has risen again. And I think now taking him to the Forbidden City, where he'll have dinner, he'll see some of the historical artifacts, will really resonate with Xi Jinping's promise to the Chinese nation, which is he will restore China to centrality in world history and international relations. And I think President Trump, anyone would really get the message that China is a great country and is back when they make that trip into Tiananmen and then have dinner in the Forbidden City.
And Matt, to you in Beijing, it's very hard for, I guess, people outside of China to understand just how special this is, at least from China's point of view, having the U.S. president inside the Forbidden City. When I was doing your job, I remember back in 2007, Starbucks got run out of the Forbidden City because it was seen as being too American, too capitalist. So, this is something which Xi Jinping is doing essentially because he can right now.
Yeah, it's exactly right. Xi Jinping has consolidated power in a way that no Chinese leader has, frankly, since the days of Chairman Mao Zedong, the founder of communist China. And so Xi Jinping, in days past, for example, when he first took over in 2012, there's no way he would have been able to do this, if only because domestically he would have gotten a lot of criticism. The Forbidden City is a central port of Chinese culture, and to bring another foreign leader in there to show that kind of respect to another foreign leader inside the Forbidden City would have met with a lot of pushback. And it's also, the Forbidden City has been a symbol of some difficult times in China's past. During the later years of the imperial system here, the Forbidden City was, for some time, an example of how China couldn't stand up to the world's powers. But now Xi Jinping has really said, this is my country. I'm going to do what I want to do here. And there is a lot of symbolism with him taking Donald Trump inside the Forbidden City. He's doing it and saying, this is what I can do, and who's going to stop me now, because my name and my thoughts are literally etched into the Chinese Communist Party constitution.
Just a few hours earlier, Donald Trump was in Seoul, and he had this very personal message, sort of an insult, if you like, for Kim Jong-un. Listen to this.
I also have come here to this peninsula to deliver a message directly to the leader of the North Korean dictatorship. The weapons you are acquiring are not making you safer. They are putting your regime in grave danger. Every step you take down this dark path increases the peril you face. North Korea is not the paradise your grandfather envisioned. It is a hell that no person deserves.
So, Daniel, to you, that almost seems sort of worse than calling him Rocket Man.
It does, in a way, and I think it's also an interesting statement insofar as it will appeal to Beijing. Because actually, for many years and even decades, the Chinese leaders have been trying to encourage North Korea to pursue the same kind of reform and opening policy that China has pursued so successfully. North Korea always refuses. So to say that North Korea is not the paradise that Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-un's grandfather, expected, Chinese leaders will say, you're right, it's not. And the other thing is, by making a reference to Kim Il-sung, he was a close comrade, really, of the Mao Zedong era Chinese leaders and the Deng Xiaoping era Chinese leaders. So I think that's kind of possibly a shout out to China as well as an insult to North Korea.
There's so much going on. You know, you can read into this because it is all nuanced. It is, you know, it's diplomacy, it's China, it's North Korea. But Daniel, thank you for explaining some of it. And Matt, thank you as well for keeping us up to date with what's going on with the president's visit there. And with that, we'll take a short break here on Newsroom LA. More on Donald Trump's warning to Kim Jong-un, that warning he delivered from the National Assembly in South Korea. What does North Korea think about all of this? Well, that in a moment. Well, just a few hours ago in Seoul, the US president warned North Korea's Kim Jong-un, do not underestimate us and do not try us. CNN's Will Ripley has North Korea's reaction in this exclusive report.
I spoke with North Korean officials here in Pyongyang just after President Trump gave that speech at the National Assembly in Seoul, and they reiterated a comment that they gave just about an hour before he even spoke, trying to downplay the significance and the impact of President Trump's words, saying, quote, "We don't care about what that mad dog may utter. We've heard enough." The North Koreans also saying that the president's words will not affect any plans for upcoming military tests. They say those plans are already in place, and the words of the U.S. president aren't going to provoke them one way or another. They say there will be more nuclear tests and missile launches happening at the time and place of their choosing. But what they are accusing President Trump of doing is continuing to push the situation here on the Korean Peninsula closer to the brink of an all-out military conflict. In fact, those same government officials told me that they believe this is the closest that the peninsula has ever been to war since the end of the Korean War back in 1953. And that's a very strong statement, considering the fact that there have been many moments over the decades where tensions have been particularly high. But it just goes to show you how seriously right now the North Korean government takes the rhetoric and the actions, perhaps even more importantly, of the Trump administration. Because as we speak, there are 3 U.S. aircraft carriers in the waters off the Korean Peninsula. There's a ballistic missile submarine and other military assets preparing to engage in large-scale military exercises. Once again, the kind of exercises that always infuriate this country and its government and often provoke them to engage in some kind of response on their own. So will North Korea follow through on a nuclear test or a missile launch while President Trump is here in Asia? Well, that's something we just have to watch and wait. Will Ripley, CNN, Pyongyang, North Korea.
Okay, for more, Michael Shires joins us now, Associate Professor of Public Policy at Pepperdine University. Just to pick up on the point that, because Donald Trump raised this in the speech, that, the 3 aircraft carrier, the nuclear submarine, he referred to them as the most beautiful F-18s and the most beautiful, magnificent F-35s. That is a message to North Korea. It's also a message to China as well, right?
It is. It's a really strong message. It says, here we are, we're serious. I think there's also kind of a defensive aspect. I mean, the President of the United States is just a few miles from somebody that he's exchanged some pretty harsh words with.
And with that in mind, they've been going back and forth for such a long time. Donald Trump has drawn so many red lines. It's like, crayon gone crazy. And he drew a lot more red lines now. It seems that if he wasn't backed into a corner before, he is now.
Well, he's made a strong statement that he's going to try and change the status quo. And the trend that North Korea is on is a threat to the United States. And as president, he's doing everything within his power to try and reverse that. Now, whether he's successful or not is going to depend a lot, I think, on the Chinese and the Russians.
Yeah. The problem, though, is that Chinese and certainly Russian interests when it comes to North Korea are completely opposed to U.S. interests.
Absolutely in the case of Russia. I think in the case of China, we actually have some leverage with all the trade and all the issues that Trump has raised in terms of the bilateral relationship to put some pressure on him.
The president also raised this, made this call for all peace-loving nations to come together to rein in North Korea. That's a multinational strategy, like playing 3D chess. Someone said this is a president who likes playing checkers or hungry hippo. This is not his thing, right?
Well, I think that the multilateral sanctions that the UN approved were a first step, and I think he's going to leverage those as far as he can. But I think he's also going to cut some bilateral deals with the Chinese to try and put more pressure on the North Koreans. And I actually see the Chinese as being central actors in any kind of solution that comes out of this.
The issue, though, for China is that they are willing to go as far as they have to keep Washington happy, just enough so that the regime never collapses. And that's kind of what we've seen play out, time and time again.
Well, the issue is the nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that Trump would be happy enough without regime change as long as there was a sense that the nuclear weapons were off the table.
In the past, when there's been this diplomacy between the 6-party talks, for example, the United States, North Korea, and a few other countries, China, Japan, Russia, those talks were aimed at getting a freeze on the nuclear program, freezing the missile program. Donald Trump has made this demand of denuclearization from the very beginning before talks can even get off the ground. That seems to be a non-starter.
Well, it's a starting negotiating position.
Right.
I mean, I think he'll be satisfied with progress. I mean, if you had the Chinese controlling the weapons, for example, that might satisfy him. I think there's going to have to be some motion in that direction where you have external verification and control of the actual weapons, not only for the United States, but also for the Japanese and the South Koreans and the Philippines and all of our allies that are in the region.
It's like an Iran nuclear deal. Don't mention the Iran nuclear deal, but
well, it's a bad precedent if you're thinking about what's happened in North Korea.
Okay. Michael, thanks so much. We appreciate you coming in.
It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Great. We'll take a short break. When we come back, was last year's cyber attack on the Democratic Party an inside job or the result of a Russian cyber attack? Sources say the CIA director is reviewing that question because the president asked him to. More from Washington in just a moment. Welcome back, everybody. Almost 6 minutes to the top of the hour. We're learning more about an unusual request President Trump made to his CIA director. Sources say the president asked Mike Pompeo to meet with a conspiracy theorist who argues last year's cyber attack on the Democratic Party was an inside job rather than a cyber attack carried out by the Russians. Jim Sciutto has details.
Tonight, multiple sources tell CNN that CIA Director Mike Pompeo met at the president's urging with one of the principal deniers of Russian interference in the U.S. election. As first reported by The Intercept, Pompeo met October 24th with William Binney, a former National Security Agency employee who has theorized that the theft and release of thousands of Democratic National Committee emails was actually an inside job, carried out not by Russia, but a DNC employee. Binney tells CNN that Pompeo began the meeting, which lasted an hour, by saying, quote, "The president told me I should talk to you." Regarding the meeting, the CIA refused to comment, but it said that Director Pompeo, quote, "stands by and has always stood by the January 2017 intelligence community assessment that Russia interfered in the 2016 presidential election." The president himself has repeatedly questioned Russia's involvement, both during the campaign.
I don't think anybody knows it was Russia that broke into the DNC. She's saying Russia, Russia, Russia.
And since his election as well.
If you don't catch a hacker, okay, in the act, it's very hard to say who did the hacking. With that being said, I'll go along with Russia. Could have been China, could have been a lot of different groups.
In October, Director Pompeo prompted a clarification from the CIA when he said in a speech the U.S. intelligence community determined that Russian meddling in the 2016 election did not affect its outcome.
The intelligence community's assessment is that the Russian meddling that took place did not affect the outcome of the election.
Soon after the speech, the CIA issued a statement saying, quote, "The intelligence assessment with regard to Russian election meddling has not changed, and the director did not intend to suggest that it had." Jim Sciutto, CNN, Washington.
Been watching CNN Newsroom live from Los Angeles. I'm John Vors. For viewers in the US, the news continues with Early Start after a short break. For everyone else, Rosemary Church will be with you from Atlanta. You're watching CNN.